Hello everyone and welcome to my UDK tutorial series. In this particular episode I'm going to be going over the sound system in UDK, basically how to add in sound actors as well as the in-game sound editor. It's not like a third-party program that would allow you to individually edit the sound file by like copying and pasting stuff. It's more of being able to edit the playback of the sound in UDK by editing like the overall volume or the overall pitch or something like that. I'll get more into that later. I just didn't want people like skipping around the video trying to find a way that, oh, I can use UDK as like a third-party sound editor, hooray! No, it's not like that. Anyways, I do want to quickly apologize for not being able to get videos out that often. It takes me a while to do these. Maybe it shouldn't, but I like to record this, and I record it many times over and over again as I maybe find a better way that I could probably explain something. Instead of just writing it out, I just kind of like to go with it and just record it multiple times over. So, I mean, however long the video is, multiply that by maybe like 5 or 6 times of just me recording it, and then add render time and upload time and all that kind of stuff to it, and it can kind of take a while combined with school and Christmas coming up. And I'm making excuses, but I mean I do apologize for not getting videos up that often. Of course, you probably don't really care much about this if you're just like a random person Googling for help with your UDK problem, in which case I allude to the tutorial. Alright. First things first, content browser actor classes. As I do with all my tutorials, I'm going to kind of just display all of the stuff out here. So, the most simple sound that we can really have is just an ambient sound. Just kind of a sound, it's just out there playing. Let me drag this out here and show you what I mean. Now, if you drag this out here, you notice we don't even have like a radius of the sound. Like, you know, what's the radius of this thing? We have no idea. But that is by default until you actually add a sound to it, and then it determines what the radius is based off of what the sound is. Now, there is a way to change the radius up, but I'll talk about that much later on. Because if I start talking about that now, it'll lead into a tangent, and it'll kind of just ruin the whole structure of the video. But if we open up the properties, we can see there are very few options. It's really, like I said, it's a pretty simple sound thing to work with. Now, if we go over here, we grab like a wind sound or something. This sounds good. Plop that in there, and now we've got a sound working. And you should also see we now have a radius defined as where the sound is going to. Now, keep in mind that I'm using a sound cue and not a sound node wave. That is very important, and I will explain the difference later on. If I try to explain it now, like I said earlier, it will kind of give off onto a tangent, and it'll just kind of it'll mess up the structure of the video. But I will explain the difference. Just know that there's a difference between sound cue and sound node wave. Now, the other things that we have here is a volume, pitch, and high frequency gain multiplier, and just numbers that we can kind of tweak. This very center circle in here, this right here, is like basically the maximum volume of the sound. It's basically we're standing right next to this thing, essentially. I'm sorry, I had to cough. Okay. We're essentially standing right next to this thing when we're beside it. And do also keep in mind with level design that this has no real source. It just kind of, like, from this, like a middle, some infinitesimally small middle point, it just is going in like a spherical area until it reaches this outer defined sphere, and then it starts fading until it gets to this sphere, and then it stops completely. So outside this outside this outer sphere, you cannot hear the sound at all. Right on the inside of this, you can barely hear it. And as you progress towards this, it gets louder. As you progress away from this, over here, it gets softer. Essentially, that's how that works. So if we decided to increase the volume by 2, it would increase it. It wouldn't necessarily make every single part. It wouldn't like take this center part, multiply that by 2. Take this random section here, multiply that by 2, and then like take this section over here and multiply by 2. The fade of the sound is kind of like a scaling factor. So it'll take the middle sound, like the bass sound volume, multiply that by 2, and fade from that. It doesn't really use a volume multiplier on the fade, because then you would actually get to a point where, you know, you hear sound and then it's just a sudden drop off in sound. It's not like a gradual fade. Because if we multiplied whatever it is at the very, very edge of this, the absolute edge, we multiply that sound by 2, it wouldn't be a complete fade. It wouldn't be like 0.1. It wouldn't be like 0.91. It would be like, you know, 0.8, then 1. It's not like simple drop off. So it'll fade from whatever the center volume is back. And the pitch multiplier just changes the pitch of the sound, so it doesn't matter what the drop off is at all. It'll just be a higher pitch or lower pitch sound depending on what you set it to. Now, high frequency gain, not entirely sure what a high frequency gain is, because I'm not really a person that works in the sound field. I apologize that I can't explain this to you. Trust me, I've already done a whole bunch of research and looking up specific terms. I've got a broad variety of tutorials. UDK is more like a thing that you would kind of specialize in one area for. I don't quite know what high frequency gain is. If you're a sound person, that's essentially the high frequency gain that would affect whatever it affects. There you go. Okay. Now, next, we've got the ambient sound simple. This one right here. I'm just going to do that because we don't need the distraction of that. Okay, I'm skipping the ambient sound spline on purpose because it's a lot more complicated than all of these combined. So we'll come back to that one. But ambient sound simple has a predefined radius for a minimum and maximum. And if we open up the options here, it has a lot more that you can edit. However, it uses a sound node wave instead of a sound cue, which is the sound node wave is basically just the raw file, unedited at all, while a sound cue is somewhat more edited. I'll be more specific later. I almost kind of started getting off on a tangent then. I don't want to talk too much about it until we get to... Because there's an editor that allows you to edit the sound node waves and turn them into a sound cue, and whenever I start talking about that, it'll make more sense of explaining how it all works. Anyway, so for the ambient sound simple, we can set a minimum radius, maximum radius. Now the minimum radius is of course going to be how large the minimum circle is. So the larger that you have that set, the longer you can walk in one direction and hear the maximum volume of the sound. So do be careful how large you set that, unless you purposely want to have the sound just stay the same volume no matter where you are on the level. But you do want to be careful with it because it can sometimes sound weird if you like have a radio playing music and you walk 100 yards away and it's still the exact same volume. People you normally expect to have a fade off eventually. So do be careful how big you set that. Obviously your max you can just have as big as you want because the sound is going to be fading slowly, so they will hear a gradual fade and you can just have it go as far as you want if need be, to cover the entire level. If you want to have like some kind of wind sound or something, you can just cover the entire level with that if you need to. But just the minimum radius is what you want to be careful with. The max radius is going to be the outside circle, so that over there. Now you have attenuation, spatialization if you want to, set those on. What you want to be a tuning, like your a tuning at max thing, and the kind of model you want to use to, like the algorithm you want to use to attune the sound with, which attune is just kind of mean to sort of taper off, essentially. So you can kind of use whatever kind of algorithm that you want to use for tuning. Low pass filter is kind of hard to explain what it does. Essentially, in a nutshell, it sort of muffles the sound. Technically, a low pass filter sort of filters out certain frequencies of the sound. Essentially, you end up getting sort of a more muffled sound, but that is not always the case. I would try and show you, but a lot of the time, especially with like wind sounds, which would be the best for using without searching through all of the possible sounds and finding a good one. Wind sounds would be a good example, but it's kind of really hard to hear the difference between low pass and non. Essentially, it just kind of makes it more muffled because, if you have a heavy wind outside and you walk inside, it's not going to be sounding exactly the same, just slightly softer. It's also parts of the sound are not going to be making it through the walls, so it's going to sound slightly different. Mostly the same, but slightly muffled. So that's kind of what the low-pass filter does. And you can set like a minimum radius of when this kind of starts occurring and the maximum radius of when this is occurring. So while there is no visible way to see this, there is sort of like a secondary set of spheres that are the low-pass filter. Now, the pitch modulation stuff here, essentially you have the lower bound and the upper bound of the volume and pitch, which you can adjust independently if you need to kind of change the way the sound is. So if you keep them the same, it's just going to be, both the higher frequencies and lower frequencies, because the lower frequencies are going to be about the same. You can adjust them independently if need be. So if I essentially, if I increase the maximum pitch and increase the minimum pitch, it would bring the overall sound up. But if I left the maximum pitches the same, but increase the minimum pitches, it would make the sound a little bit different, because this, as you see, the tooltip says the lower bound of pitch, and then the upper bound of pitch. So we're kind of changing separate sections of the sound at a time, so you can kind of play around with it and see what you get. And I'm not entirely sure as how that works, but that's kind of the gist of it that I have gathered from experimenting around with it. Now, the sound slots, essentially what this allows you to do is place multiple sounds together in this. So if we go out here and we grab like a sound node wave, we can just grab like a couple different, we could grab like all of these wind sounds, all of these different sounding wind sounds, and put them all in here, and they would all play at the same time. And you can independently adjust the pitch and the volume of each individual wind sound if you wanted one to sound a little louder than the other. And I believe the weight maybe kind of prioritizes them differently, so the higher the weight of one, the more prioritization it sort of gets. But I'm not entirely sure how it works on an ambient sound simple, because it works differently on other sound types. But in this one, I don't really know if the weight has much use. I just know that you can put a whole bunch of different sounds on top of one another and have you can put all of these wind sounds together in one wind sound and have it play that. Now, of course, autoplay is self-explanatory. You can just check this or uncheck it. on whether you wanted to start playing immediately or wait for some sort of signal or something from something like Kismet, you know. All right, next we've got, whoops. Come on, okay. So we've got ambient sound simple toggleable. That is self-explanatory. Essentially, it's the same thing that we just saw. It just has the ability to be toggled on and off. Ambient sound movable. That's the same thing as the ambient sound, the first one, but it's just able to be moved around. Now, the non-loop is a little bit different in that, and of course, we have a toggleable version of this as well. This one is red. Okay. So we've essentially got ambient sound, orange. We've got ambient sound simple, blue, and we've got ambient non-looping, which is red. So we open up the options for this. Sort of a lot of different things as well. It looks similar, but it's kind of like got similar options to the ambient sound and the ambient sound simple. It's kind of like both of them combined. But basically, it doesn't play looping sounds. In the others, you could just like apply a wind sound or something. It would just kind of play continuously over and over and over again. With this one, it sort of like it'll play each, like you give it a bunch of sounds, like you have sound slots. So I could give it, let me see. Let's play with this a little bit. I always forget I have this minimized down here. Okay, so we've got, I don't know what kind of this is. Let's give this that one. Add another one. Give it this one. Add another one. Give it this wind sound. Alright, so now we have 3 of these. It's going to play each one time, and then it's going to pick another one, and then it's going to pick another one. And it's got a random number generator built inside, but the weight is sort of what kind of says, hey, prioritize this one a little more. This one has a sort of higher chance of occurring. And it'll just like play, it won't loop them, essentially. It's not going to combine all 3 and just loop that sound continuously over and over again. It's just going to, while you're inside, it's just going to take one, pick it, play that, and then pick another one, play it. And it's a random chance, so we could get the same thing multiple times in a row. But essentially, that's what you get. And all, of course, these similar options, delay, minimum, and maximum. We could set a delay. Delay minimum, second. Delay maximum, 5 seconds. So there could be a 1 to 5 second delay between each sound playing individually. Now, if we go ahead and hop in here and kind of listen to this, we'll see what we have. I'm not sure exactly how loud this is going to be, so if you're wearing headphones, just be warned that this could potentially be loud. Okay, so we've got one sound playing. We've got another sound playing. Possibly the same one, but again, it's a random chance. Longer delay this time. Different sound playing. We'll let it cycle one more time. So in this case, it may be either a long sound, or the delay is just very quick, because it could just be 1 second. Because I know there's a pretty long. Yeah, there we go. We got a different wind sound this time. So that's essentially how that works. Obviously, you might not want to use that with a wind sound, but maybe like some kind of generator or something. You have like different kind of generator mechanical sounds all playing, and you can kind of like choose different ones at random and all that kind of good stuff.
And this will allow you to do this. And you can apply low pass filters, and you have, your minimum, maximum low pass filters, and you have all this stuff that you can kind of play around with to get a really nice sounding sound. Anyway, and they're all used for different purposes. Obviously, this one cannot play a looping sound, and you don't really, you could technically just apply one sound node and set a delay to 0, and it would loop it continuously, but you have all of this extra code built in to handle this stuff. You don't really want to use it for that purpose, So, anyway, that is pretty much all of the different sound actors except for the splines, which I'll come back to. Right now, I want to open up the content browser and hop in here and explain the difference between sound node wave and sound cue. Now, essentially, a sound node wave, when imported in, let me see. SO. Okay, sound node wave, sound cues only. Okay. So, as you can see, we only have like 4 sound cues, but we've got like a bunch of different wind sounds. Essentially, the sound node wave is the raw sound. It's like if you go out and record a bunch of birds singing and just without editing, you can edit it in a third-party program. But then you take whatever that final product is and put it in UDK. That is the sound node wave. It is just the raw file. It's completely equivalent to whatever you would have on your computer saved as the file. The sound cue is sort of a combination of sound node waves that have been combined in certain ways to create a more distinct sound. So, if you want to create your own sound cue or edit existing ones, you can actually just hover over them and left-click, or no, I'm sorry, not left-click, right-click, and you have an option, Edit Using Sound Cue Editor. And so now we can see what this particular sound cue is made up of. Now this is actually a sound that I custom made, so I kind of know how this works. I custom made this sound, so you're not going to have this ambient sound, exteriors, wind, and distant lightning. You're not going to have this distant lightning sound. You're also not, I'm pretty sure you have the wind, grassy, high stereo, but this distant lightning sound is a sound that I got. This is not part of default UDK. But essentially what I did is I combined this sound, set them to be looping, I mixed them together. So I essentially am combining the two. And this looping is here so that it's not going to just play one time. It's kind of putting a looping in here. You can actually have like one sound be looping continuously and one not. So if you wanted to have some sort of fancy sound where you had like an initial lightning strike, and then you just had like you have a lightning strike, bam! Sort of like that that kind of thing. If you're in like if you've ever been in like southern states in the United States, if you've ever been in more southern states, I live in Florida, so I'm kind of familiar with this. In the middle of the summer, it may be looking fine, starts getting really cloudy, starts kind of getting dark, and all of a sudden you hear that singular strike of lightning, and then the sky falls out and starts raining. You could essentially do something by having like that by having a one-time strike of lightning without a looping, and then you have a rain sound that's continually looping. So you never hear the lightning again. You just hear it the one time, and then it's played, it's done, but the rain continues looping continuously. So I do, however, have both of these set to looping, and then I have it feeding into the mixer. And you can see the input volume of each of these, and I actually adjusted the input volume independently so that one is a little louder than the other. Because I think one of these I think the distant lightning was already pretty soft, so I wanted to bring that up more, and you could hear the lightning more than you could hear the wind. But anyway, the attenuation is sort of just kind of there to help with stuff. I can apply a low-pass filter if I want to. And anyway, I forget exactly why I put that there. I think that was already in there or something. Anyway,
it helps. I found it to add some stuff to the sound. Now, if you right click, you can see all of the different things that you can add. There's not too much, but it works it works the same way Kismet does, and just kind of like dragging things around in movement wise. You just take whatever you want and just kind of apply it. Oscillator, random. So you could use random if you have like if you have a person just saying a bunch of numbers like 1 through 10. You could have all of those numbers, import them all into one sound cue, have a random node in here, hook it up, and then it would just randomize which one it picked. Every time the sound was selected, it would have a random number generator built into the sound that would pick one of the sound node waves you have selected. So, you could have like some kind of sound on like a button hooked up. It would just be one sound. You wouldn't have to apply like 10 sounds and hook it up through Kismet and do fancy stuff. You just have one sound that you have play every single time that you hit a button. But within the sound itself, it has a random number generator built in. So that's where this can kind of be useful. Now, of course, we saw the same thing with the ambient sound non-loop, but you could also build it in this way and just apply it to an ambient sound, just an ambient sound. But anyway, now, if you remember, I said that the ambient sound didn't have a radius showing until you applied a sound to it, and it got its radius, the minimum maximum radius from the sound itself. Well, the attenuation is where you set this, the minimum and maximum radius for the sound. You can set that in there. So you can have a pre-built minimum maximum radius if you want to just use an ambient sound to place it in there, which is kind of what that's for. If you want to go to the trouble to set up the sound cue, because honestly, you can do a lot more in this editor than you can do with like combining a bunch of different stuff in just an actor class. That's why the editor's here. So if you want to go to the extra time to make it more complicated and complicated in a good way, if you want to make the sound much better and sound better, it'll be more complicated work. But then you can just essentially make it very easy and just use this ambient sound simple. Just throw it in there and just duplicate it a bunch of times wherever you need it. So this is essentially how this works. Now I'm not going to show you a bunch of different like things on how to like add stuff together. It's really simple to figure out if you know what all of these do, and they're really easy to figure out. Distance crossfade, looping. Sound node mature just kind of sets this as a mature sound. Mixer modulator. It's self-explanatory, and the wiki has plenty of documentation on the specifics if you don't know what something means. But anyway, this. Oh, by the way, the sound node wave param is essentially just one of these. It's just one of the actual sounds themselves. That's what that is. So if we close this, yeah. That's essentially what that does. And you'll notice at the bottom it says forever, none. That's meaning that it'll loop continuously. However, where is it? I'm not sure where it is. I'm not sure. I think my actual lightning sound is around like 5 minutes or something of recording, but it'll just loop continuously. Anyway, so that's kind of how that works, and that's the difference between all of those things. Now, and the ambient sounds simple. Let me just bring it back up again so you know what I'm talking about. The ambient sound simple actually does allow you to add multiple sound slots. So you could sort of create a sound cue, but again, you wouldn't be able to have it randomized. You wouldn't be able to do any crossfading or delaying between sounds, or you wouldn't be able to set certain sounds to be non-looping if you didn't want them to. They'll all just be defaulted to whatever the sound nodes themselves are set to, and it'll just kind of loop that. So you could sort of simulate a sound cue with this, which is kind of why this is here, if you wanted to do something simple. ambient sound simple. There you go. That's the name for it. So just kind of emphasize that. Now, on to the really cool but also really complicated stuff. Splines. Oh my goodness, it took me forever to figure out how to do this, but they're really, really cool. Alright, let me add one in here. And remember, you can only get to them through the actor class window, which is why I prefer to drag stuff out of here, because it shows you absolutely everything. Now, the ambient sound splines are all the same, except, of course, we have toggleable, we have non-looping, multi-cue, and essentially they all work the same. They just do different things. Like, you know, the non-loop obviously would work the same as our ambient sound non-looping, and the toggleable would work the same as our toggleable. Multi-cue, it just allows you to kind of cue multiple sounds. So they're pretty simple to figure out whenever you're playing around with them separately like this. But I'm just going to drag one of these ambient sound splines out here, and I'll show you what they do. Alright, so first off, it's going to look confusing because you got this like a big red thing here and this random white dot. What you're going to want to do is switch out of this main view right here and go to like these orthographic views. So, let's see here. We've got the dot here. And it's about, let's drag this up just a little bit. This first white dot is going to be essentially your starting point, so to speak. Now I'm going to drag this over to the side here. Yeah, I'm going to drag this over more. Actually, I'll drag it with this one. So I'm going to drag this all the way to the edge here. And I'm going to drag it back as well. Alright, so we've got it in good position. Now, you've got it, you want to get this at your starting point, because there's no real easy way to delete points in between. You just have to delete, like, what we're going to be doing is we're going to just be making, like, this curved line, or just a line, of areas where sound will travel. And this will make more sense in a second. But it's really, you want to make sure that you kind of plan this out a little bit ahead of time, because if you want to delete like a point in the middle, you would essentially have to delete all points leading up to that one, and that can be a real pain if you have like 20 or so of these made and you want to delete like the second point. You have to delete all 18 of them and then start over again. But we're going to start with this one. You want to kind of click on it, hold your mouse there, you can kind of move it around, and then press the period button. And you're going to then get a second one that you can start dragging out. So we're just going to maybe drag this, where do we want to drag this to? For demonstration purposes, so you can see how this is going to work, I'm going to drag this way out over here. I'll explain why later. But I'm going to drag this way out over here, hit the period button again, and see it's curving, right? It's curving. And I'm going to drag it all the way back to this corner. Okay, so we've just got 3 points, pretty simple. If we wanted to delete a point, we could just, you know, hover over it, hold left click, hit backspace. Now, again, like I said earlier, if we want to delete this point, we'd have to delete this. We would have to delete this point first, and then this point. So make sure you again plan them out. But we've got this done. Now I'm sure you're confused as to what we're doing, but we've essentially created an area where this entire line is the source of the sound. The sound is going to curve in this direction. So if we were to walk, I'm going to demonstrate this in game in a second. If we were to start like at this corner down here, and we'll hear the sound and we start walking this way, it'll kind of start fading away because it's curving over here. And as we approach this corner, it'll start getting louder again. And you can use this for something like a river. You can make one of these following the river that you have created in your level. And it'll essentially sound like the river is it's creating the actual sound because it's curving with the river. So you don't have to create like 100,000 different individual sound actors. You just create one sound spline, and each one of these points will allow you to curve it differently. And you can just keep adding these, and keep adding these, and keep adding these to create this neat looking or neat sounding curved line thing. So let's go ahead and jump in so we can actually see what I'm talking about. So we head over here, I believe this corner is what I set it to. Oh wait, no, I didn't actually give this a sound class. So let me hit F4. By the way, all of the stuff in the spline component thing is just like all kinds of just random stuff that doesn't really matter to the actual sound itself. If you want to look at it, that's fine, but it doesn't matter to the sound. The distance between points does a little bit. If you want to change that, you can, but that doesn't also matter that much. Of course, autoplay is here if you want to turn that on or off to, use it in Kismet. Now, listener scope radius. It doesn't really like it if you change this, so don't worry about that too much. But you can change the volume multiplier, pitch multiplier, high frequency gain multiplier, and this is just an ambient sound spline. It works the literally exact same as an ambient sound does. It's just a spline. So if we had, an ambient sound spline non-toggleable, or no, I'm sorry, non-looping, it would work exactly the same as a non-looping sound, just as a spline. So you would see the same options. So let me just quickly apply sound cue, and we'll be pretty much done here. Okay, apologies for that little blip in the video. I had to go do something. So anyway, yes, I was going to apply a sound cue to this. So we'll just use my wind and distant lightning sound. Again, this is not in default UDK. This is my own sound. So we'll exit this, and okay. Let me just make sure I'm entering on face myself that way. Okay. So it'll be this corner. When we get close enough, we should start hearing it. There we are. See? So we got the lightning sound. And I know that sounds like really weird sounding, but that is just kind of a thing that we would have to... It's a tweaking thing. We kind of have to tweak around with it. But again, it's fading off because the sound is curving away from us. And it should start to come back. There it goes. So there it is. So that's how that works. Now, if we wanted to do some more with this, we click on this, hold this, hit period, and drag maybe over there. We'll just drag that way, because sure, why not? Now, if I am correct in my understanding of this, the red circle there essentially is within the listener's scope. So let's see. I'm not... Okay, the listener's position. Okay, I understand. So, like, I have the thing pulled up on the side because, again, I've experimented with this and it's kind of complicated to understand. This right here essentially just kind of represents the listener's position, so to speak. So you can kind of... It's more of a... This is more of a reference point rather than anything else. It's kind of just showing you, okay, if the listener is here, where's he going to
be hearing the sound from. This blue dot right here, that is going to represent where the listener will appear to be hearing the sound from, right? So if I move, like to demonstrate this, if I go back to, where am I spawning at? Over here. Drag it over here. So if I put this right where I'm spawning at, the sound is going to be appearing. Now I'm going to be facing this way. So the sound is, I'm going to be like facing over here. The sound is going to appear to be coming from behind me. Now as I start moving this way, closer and closer to here, the sound is still behind me, and it's, as we start to engage more of this, it's going to start drastically pulling forward until it is in front of me. Okay, so that's what we should experience. Wait. Well, the listener scope is the listener scope's probably a little larger than our actual player scope, so we should probably reduce that. But at any rate, we'll do this all the same. Now if we head up this way, we should be able to hear it. If we head back this way. Unless, do we have to apply? No, we've got it applied. So that first doors, yeah, so it should be coming right here. Oh, there it goes. Yeah, I don't know why it wasn't wanting to show up or something. Okay, so now it's working right. I just had to click on it and open the properties window for some reason, and now it works. I don't understand that, but so right now it kind of sounds like the sound is behind us, right? And as we start, it'll sound more towards the front, right? So you see how that kind of faded a little bit. So right about here, we're kind of like right between those two sections, that the corner and then from behind us, so it's a little softer. And if we head this way, we should get closer to it, because it's going to be coming right straight through here. So the sound is to the right, sound is to the left. And if we head this way, it should gradually drop off. So that's how that works. A little more complicated, really, really useful. Now, again, you don't want to just scatter these throughout your level and use these instead of, the ambient sound actors, because you have more control with a sphere that you can kind of edit and play around with than with something like this, which you have like a line. You have to. It's a little harder to get exactly where the sound you want. It's a little harder to get the sound to go exactly where you want, but very useful for something like a river or like a cliff or something where you want the wind to be everywhere on the edge of the cliff kind of thing or something like that. Oh, I almost forgot. One other thing is the let's see where it is. Reverb volume, and the reverb volume toggleable, which is the same thing as reverb volume, just obviously you can turn it on and off. Let's put one of these down. Okay, so we've got, whoops. Let's drag this up a little bit. It's gonna, okay, that's the center point. I'm gonna have to play with this. I forgot to set one of these up, dang it. Okay, let me just open the properties menu and show you what it does. No.
Okay. Better yet, I will grab this and have a... Now, keep in mind the volumes. Typically, you want to have the builder brush selected when you do these, because they're going to be put inside the inside of the builder brush. So there we go. Yeah, now we got this thing working. Okay, so this is sort of yellowish looking. And if we hit the properties menu on this to see the reverb volume, now we can change the color if we want to. These are cool. I'll cut the video in a second, go make one of these so you can see an example of how this works. Well, you can hear one rather. But basically what this does is kind of designate an area to be sort of as a separate zone of sound. So you can have sounds within this zone and outside of this zone, and they can interact with each other. But the way this works is sort of like, you know, you're walking down the street, maybe somewhere like New York. You see like a little cafe or something. You hear the sound of traffic all around you. You're outside. You hear the sound of traffic. You're walking, decide to go into the cafe. You open the door to the cafe, and you can immediately hear all of the noise, the hustle and bustle. And you walk into the cafe, and you can no longer hear the traffic as much. That's real life. That's how it works. The sound gets muffled. It kind of blends into the other, and whatever sound that you're now inside hearing comes the major sound. That's what the reverb volumes allows you to do. It's not necessarily the inside or the outside, but you can specify basically what other sounds that are basically whatever sounds are outside of this region are going to sound different than, you know, sounds from the inside of the region. Now, this is not saying that anything outside of the reverb volume is technically labeled as outside sounds, but you know, they're just outside of the reverb volume, so they treat them differently. So the options that we have here is the priority. So, you know, which if you have multiple of these, you can like layer them and set priorities for them, so it knows which ones to calculate first and then to calculate, kind of thing. It kind of works like this additive subtractive thing. You set a higher number, it kind of calculates that first and then moves down, and that'll affect the sound, the order that it does it. You have your reverb type, so you can kind of give it like a type, like concert hall or whatever. And I'll let you hear a sample of this. I'll have to twiddle around with it and get it to fit within a certain radius so you can like hear this. I don't want to just do this on camera. But anyway, you can give it like whatever kind of reverb you want. The volume of the sound, and then the fade time. So, sort of how this is going to work is like you're walking, and you walk through the reverb. Whatever sound was on the outside of the reverb volume is now going to go to a certain volume that you have set, and then it's going to take whatever the fade time amount is, which is in seconds. It's going to take like 2 seconds to fade down to half as loud, basically. So you have a wind sound going, it's really loud, you walk through, and it's going to take 2 seconds, and it's going to fade down to half as loud as it was. You can set that to whatever. Now the exterior volume, when you're inside of, basically this one can be a little bit confusing. It took me a little bit of thinking about this to get it right in my mind. Whenever you're inside the reverb volume, what is the exterior volume? This is what you're saying. What is the exterior volume that I hear whenever I'm inside the reverb volume? And then, of course, you have the low-pass filter and the amount of time it takes for the low-pass filter to kind of take into effect. So this is essentially what this is saying is whenever, like, I walk through a door to go and, you know, to that cafe I was mentioning, the sound doesn't immediately become muffled. Theoretically, the door is still open. You can still hear some of it, and then the door is closing, and it gradually becomes more muffled. And then it's, you know, the cars outside are muffled completely. Well, not completely, but mostly. So this is what, like, the amount of time that it takes for the low-pass filter to fade in completely, sort of, kind of, is how that works. And then when you're outside of the reverb volume, so when you're on the street, what do you hear of the cafeteria inside? What is the volume that you hear? What is the low, you hear like low murmuring or something. So it's the same thing, but and you have your time as well, which is so essentially you have your fade time overall volume, and then you have your low pass filter fade time and volume. So you have those separately. That's kind of how that works, because sometimes you can get the two kind of mix, like, okay, exterior is when I'm on the outside, what do I hear inside? But you want to always think about it from the standpoint of when I'm standing in the reverb time, the exterior is going to be the things on the outside that it's affecting. When I'm standing on the inside, the interior is going to be in me, so it's going to be the things affecting the inside when I'm on the outside. Hopefully that makes sense. Now again, I am going to cut the video here, come back, have an example put up to show you, and then we'll be finished. I completely forgot about the reverb volumes until just now, but they're very, very useful. So anyway, I'll go set that up now. Okay, we are back, and I have the thing all set up. And let me switch back to full screen. There we go. Okay. So one couple things I want to say real quick. The reverb thing, I said it wrong. Basically, what this is this applies to the reverb effect only. So whatever kind of effect that you set as like kind of some kind of echo-ish sound, like effect that you want to apply to the sound, this is the volume of that effect, not the volume of the actual sounds within the reverb volume. This is just the volume for this affects the reverb effect volume. Hopefully it makes sense. So, like where I have it set for concert hall right now, if we wanted, it has like sort of an echoey sound to it, so we can increase the volume of that echo, and also the fade time of how long it takes for that to fully fade into full volume once we enter the room. Now, one other thing I want to say is whenever you're working with the reverb volumes, you want to make sure that you rebuild your geometry, this thing right here. You want to rebuild your geometry every time that you change any settings in the reverb volume at all, or really just to be on the safe side if you change any of the settings on the sounds within the reverb volume, because it uses the geometry to kind of calculate where all the sounds are, what they're doing, and all that kind of stuff. So if you make any changes, you need to recalculate the geometry so it knows what to do with the new changes. Hopefully it makes sense. So obviously the lighting has an update because I did a full rebuild with this, including the lighting. Didn't take very long to do a full one, but anyway. So what I've kind of got as settings here, I'll kind of go over in a minute once you get the idea of how this sounds. So I'm just going to be quiet, let you hear it once, and then I'll kind of do some explanation while it's going on so you can kind of pick some things out. Okay, so essentially what I've got going on here is we have a wind sound here. And I'll show you in a minute, just in case you're thinking, well, no, they're just not overlapping. No, they are overlapping, but I'll show you in a second. But so we've got the interior set to 0.5, so we can still hear it a little bit if we get up close to the wall. So we can still hear the generator going right in there. But once we actually get on the other side of the wall where I have the reverb volume, the wind cuts down to 0.5, and then it really brings this out. Now, if you listen closely, you can kind of hear that reverb effect a little bit, kind of like that echoey, sort of kind of bouncing off the walls like it's a concert hall. Anyway, so that's about what we've got. So you can see the settings I have applied, and I just set a long delay because it felt like it, because why not? Now,
if you are thinking that these are not overlapping, here is the maximum for the generator sound, and here's the wind sound. It goes all the way into here. So they are overlapping. In fact, I'll bring this out a little bit over here, redo this, and then hop back in here just so you can verify. Can barely hear the generator at all. Now, if I were to walk over here, actually, let's see, the reverb volume exists only for this section right here. So technically, we could move this down here, like that, and we should be able to hear this all the way down the hallway, but just not in that little room. Well, now I need to recalculate this now. Okay. So if I walk down and stay close to the edge, we should still be able to hear the wind. And it's obviously fading because we're getting near the end. But the generator is also very slow. However, if we walk in here, so now I can walk directly outside, and it'll take a little while because of the fade time, but now the wind's a lot louder. So hopefully you can kind of see how that works. Let me actually set the fade times a little lower just because I was playing around with it being silly. Let me set that to like 1. Let me lower this a little more. This is 0.25. 25, 1. Rebuild. And heck, why not? While we're at it, let's do underwater for that, because that'll sound cool. Okay. So again, over here, we're fine. Hop in here. Approach over here, to the edge of the wall. Still can barely hear, however, if we hop outside, the wind picks up drastically. Walk back in. Wind dies down. So you see how that works? It's pretty cool. So we can, we can use these for these rooms and stuff that we, if we wanted to, set one up for each of these rooms, you can do this, and you can have multiple sounds all in here. And see, if we wanted, this is where the priority comes into play. If we wanted to have, like for instance, maybe we wanted for the entire complex, we wanted one giant reverb volume to cover this entire thing. So the wind is only present really out here. However, maybe there's a generator in here, but there's not a generator in here. So we could have a bigger reverb volume set as priority 1. So calculate this first, and then it calculates this, already using the data of the first one. So we'll essentially have a reverb volume that we can walk in here, hear a generator, and then barely hear a generator on this side of the wall, even though we've got, even if we were to move the generator all the way over to this side, we would barely hear it on the side of the wall. Now obviously, more tweaking is of course required if you want to get a really good effect, because what we've got here is not exactly the most optimal setup to show this. We've got kind of a really open area, so there is some still, again, it does calculate the geometry in calculating this kind of thing, so some of the effect is lost in the fact that we have a huge open thing right here. It doesn't exactly know what to do with that. It kind of just leaks out a little bit, but it works better if you have a better, like more sound structure, and you have like a door or something blocking the way. It works much better. But anyway, you've seen how that works. Just remember, every time you change your settings, recalculate the geometry, and you'll be good. So that's about it for this tutorial. If you have any suggestions for things that you think I could do better, I'm happy to hear, because I can't do better if I don't know I'm doing something wrong. So feedback is of course appreciated. Constructive criticism. If you have any suggestions for future tutorials, let me know. I am planning on the next one being fog, and a combination of fog and wind. Not like wind that we've been doing with the sound, but like visible wind. So we can combine that with the sound stuff that we just learned.
and then doing stuff with like post-processing and camera work. But anyway, if you have suggestions for future stuff, that's fine. If you have questions, I'm happy to answer them. And yeah, thanks, and I'll see you in another video. Thanks for watching.